Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The pregnancy test trembled in Sofia Alvarez's hands as she stared at the 2 pink lines that would change everything. After 3 years of marriage and 2 years of trying to conceive, she was finally carrying Victor's child. Her heart raced with pure joy as she imagined his reaction to the news. She had planned this moment with meticulous care. Victor's favorite dinner was warming in the oven. Ribeye steaks from the expensive butcher shop he preferred, paired with the 1,995 Bordeaux they'd been saving since their honeymoon. Candles flickered on their dining room table, casting warm light over the penthouse apartment they'd shared for 2 years. Rose petals formed a heart shape around his place setting, and she'd even wrapped a tiny pair of baby shoes to present alongside the test. At 26, Sofia still felt incredibly lucky to be married to Victor Lane. When they'd met at that charity auction 4 years ago, she'd been a community college student working as a caterer's assistant. He was the most successful man who'd ever noticed her. Harvard, educated, owner of a thriving real estate development company, and devastatingly handsome in his tailored suits, their whirlwind courtship had felt like a fairy tale. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips to his family's lake house, and a proposal that had literally taken her breath away. Tonight, she would tell him they were going to be parents, and their story would reach its perfect conclusion. The sound of Victor's key in the lock made her pulse quicken with anticipation. She quickly tucked the pregnancy test behind her back, wanting to savor the moment when she saw joy spread across his handsome face. "Victor, honey," she called out, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have the most incredible news to share with you." But the man who walked through the door wasn't the loving husband she expected. Victor Lane's 6-foot frame filled the doorway, his expensive Italian suit soaked from the October rain, but it was his expression that stopped her cold. His dark eyes, usually warm when they looked at her, were now frigid as winter stones. There was something different about him tonight, something cruel and distant she'd never seen before. "Pack your things, Sofia," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I want you out of here by tomorrow morning." The pregnancy test slipped from Sofia's numb fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, devastating silence. "What did you just say?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Victor stepped over the fallen test without even glancing down, his movements sharp and deliberate as he loosened his silk tie, the burgundy one she'd given him for their 2nd anniversary. "You heard me perfectly well, Sofia. This charade is over. I'm done pretending, and I'm definitely done with you." Sofia's legs felt unsteady beneath her. The romantic dinner, the candles, the rose petals, everything seemed to mock her now. "Victor, please. There's something important I need to tell you. Nothing you could possibly say matters anymore." He brushed past her toward their bedroom, his shoulder knocking against hers with deliberate coldness. "I found someone who actually deserves to be with a successful man like me, someone who isn't." He paused at the bedroom doorway, turning to look at her with undisguised disgust. "Someone who isn't beneath me." Each word was carefully chosen to wound. Sofia pressed her hand to her chest, struggling to breathe as the room seemed to spin. "Beneath you? Victor, we're married. We took vows in front of your family. My family. We promised to love each other through everything." His laughter was sharp and bitter. "Vows?" Victor began throwing his clothes into expensive leather luggage, each movement aggressive and dismissive. "Sofia, look at yourself. Really look. You come from the barrio. Your family works in factories and cleans houses for a living. You barely finished community college with a degree that means nothing in the real world." These were things he'd once claimed to love about her: her authentic background, her humble family, her down-to-earth nature. Now they were weapons in his hands. "But you said you loved me exactly as I am," Sofia whispered. "You said my family was warm and real, unlike the cold people in your social circle. You said none of that other stuff mattered." "I lied." Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was young and thought maybe I could make something out of you, clean you up, teach you how to act around important people. But you can't polish trash, can you, Sofia?" Sofia sank onto their king-sized bed, the bed where they'd made love just 3 nights ago, where he'd whispered promises about their future together. "How can you say these things to me? This isn't you, Victor. This isn't the man I fell in love with. This is exactly who I am." Victor spun around, his face twisted with something that looked like hatred. "I'm being honest for the first time in this entire relationship. You want to know what's cruel? Being trapped with someone who will never be good enough. having to pretend that you belong in my world when everyone at my office whispers about how I married down. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, Sophia picked up the pregnancy test from the floor with shaking hands. Maybe this would change everything. Maybe when he knew about the baby, the man she'd fallen in love with would return. I'm pregnant, Victor. We're going to have a baby. Victor stopped packing for one brief, desperate moment. Sophia thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of the man she'd married. But when he spoke, his voice was even colder than before. Not my problem. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean, not my problem? This is your child. Our child. My child. Victor's laugh was vicious, cutting. With you? I seriously doubt it's even mine. You probably got knocked up by some guy from your old neighborhood, and now you're trying to pin it on me. The accusation was so shocking, so completely unfounded, that Sophia couldn't even respond. She stared at this stranger wearing her husband's face, wondering when everything had gone so horribly wrong. But even if it is mine, Victor continued, zipping up his suitcase with violent force, I don't want it. I don't want any reminder of the biggest mistake I ever made marrying you. Sophia doubled over as if he'd punched her in the stomach, her free hand moving instinctively to protect her still flat belly. Please, she whispered through her tears. Please, don't do this. We can work through this. I love you so much. Your love means nothing to me. Victor grabbed his suitcase and headed for the door, not even looking back at her crumpled form. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Don't even think about trying to contact me. Don't ask for money. Don't ask for anything. You're nothing to me now, Sophia. You always were nothing, and you always will be nothing. The door slammed shut with such force that their wedding picture fell from the wall, the glass shattering across the floor in 1,000 glittering pieces. Sophia collapsed beside the broken frame, clutching the pregnancy test to her chest as sobs racked her body. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain grew heavier. The candles still flickered on the dining table, and the heart made of rose petals remained untouched, a mocking reminder of dreams that had just been destroyed. As Sophia knelt among the shattered glass of their wedding photo, holding the proof of new life in her hands, she had no idea that this moment of complete devastation would become the foundation for a transformation that would make Victor's cruelty the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 2. Rock Bottom. 4 months after Victor left, Sophia stood in front of the cracked mirror in her studio apartment's tiny bathroom, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. Dark circles ringed her once bright eyes, telling the story of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, medical expenses, and an uncertain future. Her maternity clothes, thrift store finds, and hand-me-downs from her sister, Clara, hung loosely on her frame despite carrying a baby. She'd actually lost weight because food had become a luxury she couldn't always afford. The apartment was a universe away from the penthouse she'd shared with Victor, located in the most dangerous part of the city, where sirens wailed through the night and gunshots occasionally echoed off the thin walls. It was all she could afford on her wages from 3 part-time jobs. The single room served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. A hot plate sat on a card table that doubled as her dining area, and her bed was a mattress on the floor that she'd bought second-hand for $40. Victor's divorce had been swift and merciless. His team of expensive lawyers had somehow managed to prove she wasn't entitled to any of their shared assets. Everything had been in Victor's name from the beginning. She'd walked away from 3 years of marriage with a single suitcase of clothes and a heart full of shattered dreams. Sophia pressed her hand to her rounded belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. At 6 months pregnant, she was working as many hours as her body could handle, cleaning offices from midnight to 6 o'clock a.m., waitressing at a diner during lunch hours, and doing alterations for a seamstress in the evenings. The work was backbreaking, but the combined income barely covered her $400 monthly rent and the cheapest groceries she could find. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered to her unborn child. I know this isn't the life I promised you, but I'm going to do better somehow. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her quiet moment. Sophia knew that knock. Mrs. Thompson, her landlord, and she was 4 days late on rent. Mrs. Lane. The elderly woman's voice was harsh through the thin door. I know you're in there. Sophia took a deep breath and opened the door, trying to summon a smile. Mrs. Thompson, I was just about to come see you. I'll have the rest of the rent by Friday, I promise. The landlord's eyes narrowed as they swept over Sophia's obviously pregnant form. You said that last month, girl. I'm running a business here, not a charity for unwed mothers. I'm not unwed. I'm divorced, Sophia said quietly. And please, just give me until Friday. I'm picking up extra shifts. Friday, then you're out. And next time, you better think twice before getting yourself knocked up by some man who won't stick around. Mrs. Thompson's words stung because they were so close to the truth, even if she had the facts wrong. After the landlord left, Sophia sank onto her mattress and buried her face in her hands. She had called her family for help. Clara sent what little money she could spare from her job as a hotel housekeeper. But Clara had 3 kids of her own to support. Their mother, who worked double shifts at a textile factory, had already given Sophia her entire savings, $230. Sophia's stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she'd skipped breakfast to save money. She opened her nearly empty refrigerator and pulled out a container of rice and beans, the cheapest meal she could make that still provided some nutrition for the baby. As she heated it on the hot plate, tears began to fall. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She should be in a beautiful nursery right now, surrounded by love and excitement about becoming a mother. Instead, she was alone, broke, and terrified about bringing a child into this world with nothing to offer. 2 months later, Sophia was scrubbing floors at the Pinnacle office complex when the first contraction hit her like a lightning bolt. She was in the executive washroom on the 20th floor, alone except for the sound of her own labored breathing echoing off the marble walls. "No," she whispered, panic rising in her chest as another contraction gripped her. "Please, not yet. It's too early." She was only 34 weeks pregnant. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another month and a half, but the contractions kept coming, faster and stronger with each wave. Sophia managed to call Clara from the office phone, her voice shaking with fear and pain. "Clara, something's wrong. The baby's coming. And I'm at work. Stay exactly where you are, Mija." Clara's voice was fierce with protective love. "I'm calling an ambulance and coming to get you right now." The paramedics found Sophia collapsed in the hallway outside the washroom, clutching her belly as another contraction tore through her. "Ma'am, how far along are you?" the EMT asked as they lifted her onto a gurney. 34 weeks, Sophia gasped. "But there's something else. I think there might be 2 babies." The ride to City General Hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. Clara met them at the emergency room, her face pale with worry as she ran alongside Sophia's gurney. "The babies!" Sophia gasped, reaching for her sister's hand. "Clara, what if something's wrong with them? What if they're not okay?" "They're going to be fine," Clara said firmly, though Sophia could see the fear in her eyes. "You're going to be fine. We're going to get through this together." The emergency room was chaos. Gunshot victims, overdoses, and families crying in languages Sophia didn't recognize. It took Clara arguing with 3 different nurses before they finally took Sophia back to a delivery room. "Twins, confirmed Dr. Bennett," a tired-looking resident who couldn't have been much older than Sophia herself. "And they're coming, whether we're ready or not. Are you prepared to be a mother of 2? Sophia wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Prepared? She had no insurance, no money for hospital bills, no nursery waiting at home. She had nothing except fierce love for these babies she hadn't even met yet. But as the next contraction hit, she realized that preparation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Ready or not, her children were coming into the world tonight. 14 hours later, at 3:47 a.m., on a cold February morning, Lucas Miguel Alvarez entered the world, screaming at the top of his lungs as if announcing his intention to fight for everything life had to offer. 2 minutes later, his brother Mateo Antonio followed, more quietly, but Sophia could see the same determination in his dark eyes. "They're beautiful, Mija," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her nephews. "Look at them. They're perfect." Sophia held her sons for the first time, one in each arm, and felt something shift deep inside her chest. They were so small, Lucas barely 5, 2 pounds, Mateo just over 5, but they were fighters. Lucas had Victor's strong jaw and commanding presence, even as a newborn, while Mateo had inherited Sophia's gentler features but with an unmistakable strength in his tiny grip. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them as they slept in her arms. "I'm sorry I can't give you everything you deserve right now, but I promise you this. I will never give up. I will never stop fighting for you. You deserve so much more than this, and somehow, some way, I'm going to make sure you get it." Clara squeezed Sophia's shoulder gently. "What are you going to do about Victor? I mean, those are his sons. He should know." Sophia's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. He made his choice when he called me nothing and walked away. These beautiful boys are not nothing, and they don't need a father who would see them as burdens instead of blessings. But the money, Sophia. You can't raise 2 babies alone with no help. Sophia looked down at Lucas and Matteo, both sleeping peacefully despite being born into poverty and uncertainty. I won't be alone. I have them, and they have me. We're a family now. That's what matters. 3 weeks later, the reality of caring for twin newborns in a studio apartment with no money and no help was overwhelming beyond anything Sophia had imagined. The babies cried in shifts, ensuring she never got more than an hour of sleep at a time. Her body ached from childbirth, but she couldn't afford to take time off work. She was back to cleaning offices within a week of giving birth, strapping the twins to her chest in second-hand baby carriers. One particularly brutal night, when both babies had been crying for 3 straight hours and Sophia hadn't slept in 36 hours, she found herself sobbing right along with them. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment at 2 o'clock, a baby in each arm, wondering if she was strong enough for this impossible task. That's when she looked down at Lucas, who had suddenly stopped crying and was staring up at her with those serious dark eyes that seemed far too wise for a newborn. Something in his gaze seemed to communicate directly with her heart. "We are counting on you, Mama. Don't give up on us. You're right," she whispered to him, then looked at Matteo, who was also watching her intently with Victor's dark eyes but her own gentle expression. "You're both right. I can't fall apart. You two are the best things that ever happened to me, and I'm going to prove to the world and to myself that we don't need anybody else." She wiped her tears and stood up, settling both boys in the crib Clara had found at a yard sale. "Starting tomorrow, we begin again. I don't know how yet, but I promise you both, your mama is going to be somebody, and you're going to grow up knowing that you can be anything you want to be, no matter where you come from." As if they understood, both babies settled down and fell asleep. Sophia stood over their crib for a long time, watching them breathe, and felt something she hadn't experienced since the night Victor left her. Hope. It was just a tiny spark, barely alive after months of despair, but it was there, growing stronger as she watched her sons sleep. She had no money, no husband, no support system beyond her overworked family. But she had something Victor would never understand. She had love, and she had determination that had been forged in the fire of absolute necessity. "Victor Lane," she whispered into the darkness, "wherever you are with your perfect new life, you have no idea what you threw away. But someday, I'm going to show you that these boys and I are worth more than you ever imagined." Outside her window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the sky. Sophia sat down in the broken recliner Clara had found for her and closed her eyes for a few minutes of rest before the boys woke up again. She didn't know it yet, but this was the night everything began to change. This was the night Sofia Alvarez stopped being a victim and started becoming the woman who would one day show Victor Lane the true meaning of regret. Chapter 3. The Transformation. 5 years after the twins were born, Sophia wiped flour from her hands and glanced at the kitchen clock. 4:30 a.m. In the small backyard of their rented 2-bedroom house, she could see Lucas and Matteo sleeping peacefully in the room they shared, surrounded by the scent of fresh tamales, pozole, and tres leches cake that would feed the Lopez family reunion later today. The kitchen counter was covered with aluminum containers. 50 dozen tamales, 3 gallons of pozole, 2 dozen enchilada casseroles, and 5 cakes. This single catering order would bring in $800, more than she used to make in a month during those desperate early days. What had started as pure survival had evolved into something unexpected. During the twins' first year, when Sophia was working 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment, she'd begun cooking extra portions of her grandmother's recipes and selling them to co-workers. Her supervisor at the office cleaning company, Mrs. Garcia, had been the first to pay her $20 for a tray of homemade tamales. "Sophia, these are better than my own mother's," Mrs. Garcia had said. "Can you make them for my daughter's quinceañera?" That quinceañera 30 guests, 150 total payment had been Sophia's first real catering job. Word spread through the Latino community faster than she'd expected. Within 6 months, she was getting calls every weekend. Within a year, she'd saved enough to quit 2 of her 3 jobs and focus on building what she'd started calling Sophia's Kitchen. Now, at 28, Sophia had clients booked 3 months in advance. She'd obtained her business license, built relationships with reliable suppliers, and even hired 2 part-time assistants for larger events. More importantly, she'd moved the twins to a safe neighborhood where they could play outside without her constant worry. "Mama, it smells like heaven in here," Lucas said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his hair standing up at odd angles. At 5 years old, he was already showing signs of the natural leadership that would define him. Always the first to wake up, always checking on his quieter brother Matteo. "Good morning, Mio. Did we wake you up?" "Matteo is still sleeping, but I wanted to help." Lucas climbed onto the step stool Sophia had bought him and began carefully arranging napkins in the delivery boxes. Even at 5, he understood that this work was important, that it was how they'd built their new life. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required 18-hour days, learning business skills through library books and community college night courses. And more exhaustion than Sophia had known was possible, but every sacrifice had been worth it to see her sons thriving. Matteo appeared in the doorway, quieter and more observant than his brother. "Mama, are we rich now?" The question made Sophia smile. "We are not rich, sweetheart, but we're secure. We have enough, and more importantly, we have each other." "Mrs. Carter at daycare says you're an entrepreneur," Matteo said. Sophia replied, "That means someone who builds their own business." "Like a boss?" Lucas asked, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly. Like a boss. Your mama is the boss of her own company now." Later that morning, after delivering the Lopez order, Sophia drove to her appointment with Isabel Torres, who wanted to hire her for what could be her biggest contract yet, a wedding for 200 guests, with a budget of $5,000. The Torres family lived in Crestview Heights, the wealthy neighborhood where Sophia had once lived with Victor. As she parked her used Honda in the circular driveway, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. These consultations with affluent clients still reminded her of the world she'd briefly inhabited, a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and people who measured worth by appearances. But Sophia was different now. She wore her best business suit, not expensive, but clean and professional, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd built something real with her own hands. "Mrs. Torres greeted her at the door, an elegant woman in her 52nd who managed to be both wealthy and genuinely warm. "Miss Alvarez, please come in. I've heard wonderful things about your work." They sat in a living room that was bigger than Sophia's entire house, discussing menu options and logistics. Sophia had learned to navigate these conversations with professional confidence. Never intimidated, but always respectful. "Your references are exceptional," Mrs. Torres said, reviewing the portfolio Sophia had prepared. "The Ramirez anniversary party, the Gomez quinceañera, the photos of your food are absolutely beautiful." "Thank you. I take pride in both taste and presentation. Every event reflects the family's personality and traditions." Mrs. Torres smiled. "I have to ask, how did you get started? You seem so young to have built such a reputation." Sophia had prepared for this question. "I started cooking out of necessity when my sons were babies. I'm a single mother, and I needed to find a way to support them while staying home. What began as survival became passion." "Single mother? How old are your children?" "Twin boys. 5 years old. They're the reason I work so hard. I want them to have opportunities I didn't have." Mrs. Torres's expression softened. "That's admirable. Building a business while raising twins alone, that takes incredible strength." Strength. Sophia had heard that word so often now, but it still felt strange. She didn't feel strong most days. She felt tired, worried, constantly pushing herself to do more, be more, achieve more. But maybe that was what strength actually looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you. "Can you handle an event this size?" Mrs. Torres asked. 200 guests is quite ambitious." "Absolutely. I work with a network of trusted assistants for larger events, and I can provide references from similar occasions." Sophia's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. This contract would change everything. The deposit alone would let her put a down payment on a house. "Wonderful. I'd like to book you for the 15th of June. As Sophia drove home with the signed contract, her mind raced with possibilities. This success would lead to more referrals, bigger events, maybe even the opportunity to open an actual restaurant someday. But more than business growth, she felt something deeper: vindication. Victor had called her nothing. He'd said she came from nothing and would always be nothing. But tonight, She would go home to her sons in their safe house with a contract that would earn her more in one weekend than Victor had ever given her in monthly allowances. That evening, after Lucas and Matteo were asleep, Sophia sat at her kitchen table with her business accounting spread before her. In 5 years, she'd gone from 3 part-time jobs that barely paid rent to a business that was booked solid through the summer. Her credit score had improved enough to qualify for a small business loan. She was even taking business classes at the community college on Saturday mornings. The phone rang, interrupting her calculations. "Sophia, it's Carmen Ortiz from St. Joseph's Academy." Sophia's heart leapt. Carmen was the admissions counselor at the private school she'd been dreaming of sending Lucas and Matteo to. The same school where wealthy families sent their children for the best education money could buy. "I have good news," Carmen continued. "We've reviewed your application for financial aid, and we can offer Lucas and Matteo partial scholarships for the fall semester. Combined with your contribution, we can make this work." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She'd been working toward this goal for 2 years, saving every extra penny and building her credit so she could qualify for the remaining tuition costs. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." After hanging up, Sophia walked to the boys' bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. Lucas was sprawled across his bed with characteristic confidence, while Matteo curled up neatly under his covers, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "St. Joseph's Academy," she whispered to them, "you're going to get the best education, and you're going to have every opportunity to succeed." She thought about Victor, probably sleeping in some expensive bed somewhere, never knowing that he had 2 brilliant sons who were about to attend one of the city's most prestigious schools, never knowing that the woman he'd called trash was building something beautiful from the ground up. The irony wasn't lost on her. Victor had married her when she was young and uncertain, then discarded her when she needed him most, but his cruelty had forced her to discover strength she'd never known she possessed. As Sophia returned to her business planning, she felt that familiar fire burning in her chest, not the desperate panic of the early days, but something focused and purposeful. She was no longer the heartbroken woman Victor had left behind. She was Sophia Alvarez, successful entrepreneur and devoted mother, and she was just getting started. Victor had thrown away something precious without recognizing its value, but Sophia had taken that discarded life and built it into something extraordinary. The best part was that he had no idea what he'd lost or what she'd become in his absence. Chapter 4. Rising Success. 10 years after Victor's abandonment, Sophia Alvarez stood in her corner office overlooking the city's business district, reviewing the morning schedule on her tablet. Elegancia Events, the company that had grown from her kitchen table catering business, now occupied the entire 15th floor of the prestigious Meridian building. The brass nameplate on her mahogany desk read Sophia Alvarez, President and CEO, and the view through her floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city where she'd once struggled to survive. At 36, Sophia had transformed not just her circumstances but herself. The uncertain young woman who had once tried desperately to fit into Victor's world was gone. In her place stood a confident businesswoman who belonged in any room she entered, not because someone else granted her access, but because she'd earned her place through talent, innovation, and relentless work. Mrs. Alvarez, her assistant Emily, appeared in the doorway. "The Thompson family is here for their consultation. Send them in, please. And remind me I need to leave by 4:30 today for Lucas and Matteo's academic awards ceremony." The Thompson consultation went smoothly. They wanted Elegancia Events to coordinate their son's wedding, a lavish affair with 300 guests, a budget of $150,000, and every detail customized to perfection. 5 years ago, such a contract would have seemed impossible. Now it was Tuesday's second appointment. "Your portfolio is remarkable," Mrs. Thompson said, flipping through the leather-bound album showcasing Sophia's work. "The governor's charity gala last month was absolutely stunning. And I heard you coordinated the Baxter merger celebration. Everyone's still talking about those ice sculptures that spelled out the company names." Sophia smiled graciously. "Each event is unique to our client's vision. We specialize in creating experiences that reflect your family's values and celebrate your most important moments." The truth was, Elegancia Events had become the premier luxury event planning company in the region. Sophia's combination of artistic vision, flawless execution, and genuine care for her clients had built a reputation that kept her booked solid for the next 20 months. She employed 18 full-time staff members and worked with a network of trusted vendors who competed for the privilege of being associated with her events. But more than the business success, What filled Sophia with the deepest satisfaction was watching her sons flourish in ways that exceeded even her highest hopes. At 4:15, Sophia left the office early to attend Lucas and Mateo's awards ceremony at St. Joseph's Academy. The private school had been the best investment she'd ever made, not just for the education, but for the confidence it had given her sons. She arrived at the prestigious campus and was struck by how natural it felt to walk through the marble hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. The first time she'd brought the boys here for their entrance interview, she'd felt like an imposter. Now, as one of the school's major donors and a member of the parent advisory board, she belonged here as much as anyone. Sophia, Laura Carter, mother of one of Mateo's classmates, waved her over. "I was hoping to catch you. Did you get my message about the spring fundraising committee?" "Yes, I'll be happy to coordinate the silent auction," Sophia replied. "Elegantia Events will handle it. Pro bono, of course." Laura beamed. "You're incredible. I don't know how you manage everything. Your company, the boys, all your community involvement." The ceremony began, and Sophia found her seat in the third row, reserved for families of honor students. She watched with immense pride as both her sons were called to the stage, but for very different achievements that reflected their distinct personalities. Lucas was named Student Council President for the upcoming year, the youngest student ever elected to the position. At 10 years old, he possessed a natural charisma that drew people to him, combined with an ethical compass that Sophia had worked hard to instill. He was the kind of leader who inspired others not through dominance but through genuine care for their welfare. Mateo received the Creative Arts Excellence Award for a short story he'd written about a single mother who built a business empire while raising twins. His teacher had submitted it to a national youth writing contest, where it had placed second among thousands of entries. Mateo had inherited Sophia's emotional intelligence, but combined it with an artistic soul that saw beauty and meaning in everything around him. When they returned to their seats, Lucas leaned over and whispered, "Thanks for being here, Mom. I know you had important meetings today. There's nowhere else I'd rather be," Sophia whispered back, meaning every word. Mateo, more observant than his brother, studied her face carefully. "Are you proud of us?" The question caught Sophia off guard. "Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you both that I sometimes can't breathe from the joy of it. You've become such remarkable young men." "Good," Mateo said seriously, "because we're really proud of you too." Tommy Carter's mom said, "You're the most successful woman she knows." Later that evening, after celebrating at the boys' favorite restaurant, Sophia tucked them into bed in their beautiful home in Crestview Heights. The house was a testament to how far they'd come. 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen where Sophia still loved to experiment with new recipes, and a backyard where the boys could play soccer with their friends. "Mom," Mateo said as she kissed his forehead, "can I ask you something that might be hard to answer?" Sophia sat on the edge of his bed, recognizing his serious tone. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever think about our father? Not like missing him or anything," he added quickly, "but wondering what his life is like now." The question was more complex than Mateo probably realized. "Sometimes," Sophia admitted, "but not the way I used to." "How did you used to think about him?" Lucas asked, appearing in the doorway in his pajamas. Sophia considered how to answer honestly without burdening them with her pain. "For a long time I thought about him with hurt and anger. He'd made me feel worthless, and I carried that feeling around like a heavy stone. But not anymore." "Not anymore?" Mateo asked. "No, not anymore. Now when I think about him, I mostly feel curious. I wonder if he's happy, if he ever thinks about the choices he made, if he knows what he missed by not being part of your lives." Lucas climbed onto the bed beside his brother. "Do you think he knows about us? About what we've accomplished?" Sophia pulled both boys close, overwhelmed by their maturity and insight. "I think there are probably moments when he wonders what happened to us. But honestly, it doesn't matter anymore, whether he knows or not. We built something beautiful without him. Sometimes I wonder if we would have been different if he'd stayed," Mateo said quietly. "Different? How? Maybe not as close to you. Maybe not as strong. I guess, like, we had to learn to take care of each other because it was just us 3. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "You know what? I think you're absolutely right. The 3 of us became a team because we had to, and that made us stronger than most families ever get to be." Plus, Lucas added with 10-year-old pragmatism, "If he was the kind of person who could leave his pregnant wife, we probably wouldn't have liked him very much anyway." As Sophia turned out the lights and headed to her own room, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 10 years ago, she'd been broken, desperate, and convinced she was nothing. Tonight, she was the CEO of a successful company, the mother of 2 extraordinary children, and a respected member of her community. She'd proven Victor wrong in every possible way, but more importantly, she'd proven something to herself. That worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion, no matter how cruelly they express it. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, Sophia allowed herself to imagine what Victor's life looked like now. Was he happy? Had he achieved everything he'd thought he wanted when he'd thrown away his family for someone better? The questions no longer came from a place of pain or even curiosity about reconciliation. They came from a place of genuine wonder about the path not taken. Victor had made his choice based on what he thought would bring him happiness and success. Sophia had made hers based on love and responsibility. Looking at the life she'd built, the sons she'd raised, and the respect she'd earned in her community, Sophia knew without a doubt which choice had led to real fulfillment. She had learned that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so meaningful and joyful that the person who tried to diminish you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Victor had called her nothing, but his opinion had long since lost any power to hurt her. Sophia Alvarez was everything she'd chosen to become, and that transformation had been accomplished entirely through her own courage, love, and refusal to accept someone else's definition of her worth. Chapter 5. The Invitation. Victor Lane stood on the balcony of his downtown penthouse, surveying the city below with the satisfaction of a man who believed he owned everything within sight. At 38, he had methodically achieved every goal he'd set for himself. A real estate empire worth millions, political connections that opened doors throughout the state, and now the perfect woman to complete his carefully constructed image. But lately, in quiet moments like this, Victor found his mind wandering to places he'd thought he'd permanently closed off. The silence of his perfect life had begun to feel hollow, and he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something essential was missing from all his success. "Darling, the wedding planner is here," Rachel Bennett called from inside the apartment, her voice carrying that breathless quality that had initially charmed him. "She wants to go over the final guest list." Victor straightened his Italian silk tie and walked back into the living room, where Rachel was arranging herself elegantly on their white leather sofa. At 28, she embodied everything he'd convinced himself he wanted. Blonde, beautiful, and from exactly the right kind of family. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the southeast. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 prestigious charities, and Rachel herself moved through high society with the effortless grace of someone born to privilege. She was, Victor had told himself repeatedly, his perfect match. Unlike his first marriage, this relationship made sense on paper. 2 successful people from similar backgrounds, building a life that would be the envy of everyone who mattered. Mr. Lane, the wedding planner, a severe woman named Miss Lynn, looked up from her tablet. "We have confirmations from 243 guests so far. The mayor's office called to confirm his attendance, and Senator Caldwell's wife will be representing their family." Victor nodded with satisfaction. This wedding would be the social event of the season. 500 guests at the Grand Belmont Hotel, with dinner catered by the city's most exclusive restaurant and entertainment provided by a jazz quartet that usually performed for heads of state. More importantly, it would be public validation of his choices. Everyone who mattered would witness his triumph. Proof that he had chosen correctly when he'd ended his first marriage for something better. "What about the press coverage?" Victor asked. 3 newspapers will cover the society pages. Plus, Lifestyle magazine wants to do a 6-page feature spread. Miss Lynn replied efficiently. "This will definitely be one of the most photographed weddings of the year." That was exactly what Victor wanted. But even as he planned this public celebration, he couldn't escape the strange restlessness that had been growing stronger over the past few months. Success, he was discovering, felt different than he'd expected, emptier. Somehow, "Oh, Victor," Rachel said suddenly, examining her perfectly manicured nails with the casual attention she gave most things. "Didn't you mention wanting to invite that woman from your past, your first wife?" Victor's jaw tightened at the reminder. "Yes, Sofia Alvarez. Have we sent her invitation yet?" The truth was, Victor had been thinking about Sofia more often than he cared to admit, not with longing or regret. He'd convinced himself he felt neither, but with a nagging curiosity about what had happened to her after he'd left. 10 years of complete silence, no attempts at contact, no requests for money, nothing. The absence of drama had been exactly what he'd wanted. But lately, It felt almost unsettling. "I have her address here, miss." Line consulted her list. 412 Maple Street, apartment 3B. "Shall I add her to the formal invitation list?" "Absolutely." Victor's smile was cold and calculating. "Make sure she gets the full invitation package. The embossed stationery, the silk envelope, everything. I want her to understand exactly what kind of event this is." The decision wasn't entirely rational. Victor knew there was something driving him to invite Sophia that he couldn't quite name. Part curiosity, part cruelty, and perhaps part need to prove to himself that his choices had been correct. Rachel looked puzzled, her blue eyes showing the first spark of genuine interest she'd displayed all morning. "Why invite an ex-wife to your wedding? Isn't that asking for drama?" Victor walked to the windows again, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let's call it closure. Darling, Sophia needs to see what real success looks like. She needs to understand the difference between her world and mine." But even as he said it, Victor wasn't entirely sure what he expected to accomplish. In his mind, Sophia was frozen in time. The broken, desperate woman he'd left behind 10 years ago. He imagined her still struggling, still marked by the poverty and failure he'd predicted for her. Inviting her would be a final demonstration of how right he'd been to leave, how much better his life had become without her dragging him down. "Where is Maple Street?" Rachel asked, wrinkling her nose delicately. "I don't think I've ever heard of it." "The East Side," Victor replied dismissively. "Definitely not your social circle, sweetheart." "Miss." Lynn cleared her throat diplomatically. "Actually, Mr. Lane, I should mention I had to do some research to find the correct address. There are several Sofia Alvarez in the city. The information I found suggests she may have moved around quite a bit over the years." "Perfect," Victor said with satisfaction. "That's exactly what I expected. But something in Miss Lynn's tone suggested there was more to the story. "Sir, there was also some mention of children." Victor's expression hardened. "That's not my concern." The conversation was interrupted by Rachel's phone ringing with the distinctive tone she'd assigned to her wedding dress fittings. As she took the call, chattering about alterations and accessories, Victor found his mind drifting again. Children. The word stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. Not regret, exactly, but a strange hollowness he'd never quite managed to fill despite all his success. 3 days later, Sophia was reviewing vendor contracts in her office when Emily knocked on the door, holding a cream-colored envelope with obvious curiosity. "This came by special delivery," Emily said, setting the envelope on Sophia's desk. "Very fancy. Hand-delivered by a courier in a tuxedo, if you can believe that." Sophia glanced at the envelope and immediately recognized the expensive paper stock and formal calligraphy. But it was the return address that made her blood run cold. "And Mrs. Victor Lane." But that wasn't right. Victor wasn't married. As far as she knew, he was still single. Unless, with trembling fingers, Sophia opened the envelope and pulled out the thick, embossed invitation card. "Mr. Tentersaken, Victor Harrison Lane and Miss Rachel Marie Bennett request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Saturday, the 15th of June, at 6:00 the evening, the Grand Belmont Hotel. Reception to follow. Black tie required." Sophia stared at the invitation for a long moment, her heart pounding. Victor was getting married. After 10 years of silence, he had chosen to invite her to witness his new beginning. But why? She turned the invitation over and found a handwritten note in Victor's familiar scroll. "Sophia, I thought you might enjoy seeing how well some people recover from their mistakes. I hope you'll be able to attend. It should be quite an educational experience for you. VL." The casual cruelty of the note hit her like a physical blow. Even after all these years, even with all her success and transformation, Victor still saw her as someone beneath him. Someone to be humiliated and dismissed. Sophia set the invitation down carefully and walked to her window, looking out at the city she now knew so well. Victor had no idea who she'd become. In his mind, she was probably still that broken woman he'd left behind, struggling in poverty and failure. This invitation wasn't about celebrating his happiness. It was about forcing her to witness what he perceived as her continued misery compared to his triumph. "Mrs. Alvarez," Emily's voice was concerned. "Are you all right? You look upset." Sophia turned back to her assistant, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just an invitation from someone I used to know. Must be quite someone to send such an elaborate invitation." "Oh, he thinks he is," Sophia said quietly. After Emily left, Sophia sat back down at her desk and read the invitation again. The Grand Belmont Hotel, she'd coordinated events there many times. Black tie required she had a closet full of designer gowns now. The 15th of June, she was currently free that evening. Victor expected her to either not show up at all or to arrive looking shabby and out of place, confirming his opinion that she'd never amounted to anything. He wanted to parade his success in front of her, to prove to himself and his new society friends that he'd been right to discard her. What Victor didn't know was that Sofia Alvarez was no longer the woman who could be intimidated or humiliated. She was no longer someone who would shrink away from a challenge or hide from confrontation. She picked up her phone and dialed Clara's number. "Clara, it's me. Are you free for lunch today? I have something interesting to show you." An hour later, Sofia and Clara sat in their favorite cafe. The wedding invitations spread between them on the small table. Clara's eyes were wide with disbelief as she read Victor's handwritten note for the third time. "I cannot believe this man," Clara said, her voice rising with indignation. "After 10 years of silence, he invites you to his wedding just to humiliate you. What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who needs to prove he was right about everything," Sofia said calmly, sipping her coffee. "He thinks I'm still that desperate woman who begged him not to leave. You're not going, right?" Clara's voice was firm. "You're going to ignore this nonsense and throw the invitation where it belongs." Sofia was quiet for a long moment, studying the elegant script on the invitation. "Actually, I think I am going to go." "Sofia, no." Clara reached across the table and grabbed her sister's hand. "Why would you put yourself through that? You've built such a beautiful life. Why give him the satisfaction?" "Because," Sofia said slowly, a smile beginning to form on her lips, "he's expecting to see the old Sofia, the broken, poor woman he left behind. He has no idea who I've become." Clara's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "You want to show him what he lost. I want to show him exactly what he threw away when he called me nothing." Sofia's voice was steady and sure. "I want him to see Lucas and Mateo, his sons that he never wanted. I want him to see the successful businesswoman I became, the life I built from the ashes he left behind." "The twins," Clara breathed. "You're going to bring the boys?" "They're 10 years old, Clara. Old enough to handle a formal event, and definitely old enough to see their mother celebrated for who she really is." Sofia's eyes sparkled with purpose. "Victor thinks he's setting up my humiliation. Instead, he's giving me the perfect opportunity to show him the truth." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "You know what? You're absolutely right. That man has no idea what's coming for him." "None at all." Sofia agreed. "He's about to learn that when you throw away something precious, you don't get to decide what it becomes in your absence." She folded the invitation carefully and put it back in her purse. "I need to start planning. The boys will need formal wear, and I'll need something spectacular to wear." "This is going to be expensive," Clara warned. "Are you sure you want to spend that kind of money just to prove a point?" Sofia thought about all the years of struggle, all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if she was strong enough to raise her sons alone, all the times she doubted herself because of Victor's cruel words. "Clara," she said firmly, "there's no amount of money I wouldn't spend to show Victor Lane exactly who he's dealing with now." As they left the cafe, Sofia felt that familiar fire burning in her chest, the same sense of purpose that had carried her through night school, through building her business, through every challenge of the past 10 years. Victor thought he was orchestrating her humiliation. Instead, he'd just given her the stage for her greatest triumph. The broken woman he'd discarded was long gone. In her place stood Sofia Alvarez, and she was ready to show the world exactly what Victor Lane had been foolish enough to throw away. Chapter 6. The plan. The next morning, Sofia woke with a sense of purpose that felt almost electric. As she prepared breakfast for Lucas and Mateo, her mind was already working through the logistics of what she'd privately begun calling Operation Vindication. Victor's wedding was in exactly 3 weeks, enough time to orchestrate the perfect entrance, but not so much time that she could second-guess herself. "Mom, you seem different today," Lucas observed, looking up from his cereal with the sharp perception that had always made him an exceptional student. "Excited different. Did something big happen with Elegantia Events?" Sofia smiled at her intuitive son. "Something like that, Mijo. How would you and Mateo like to attend a very elegant, very important wedding with me?" Mateo's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What kind of wedding? Do we know the people getting married?" "It's a very formal affair. Black tie. 500 guests at the Grand Belmont Hotel. You'd need to wear tuxedos and be on your absolute best behavior around some very wealthy, powerful people." "Tuxedos?" Lucas straightened in his chair, suddenly looking more like a young businessman than a 10-year-old. Like at the charity galas we attend with you? Exactly like that, but even more formal. I need to know you can handle yourselves with complete dignity around people who might be judgmental. Mateo, always more sensitive to emotional undercurrents, studied his mother's face carefully. Mom, is this about something serious? You look like you do when you're preparing for a really important business presentation. Sophia knelt down to their level, recognizing that her sons deserved more honesty than most children their age could handle. Lucas and Mateo weren't typical children. They'd been raised in circumstances that had forced them to mature quickly. You remember how I've always told you that your father chose not to be part of our lives before you were born? Both boys nodded solemnly. Well, this wedding is his wedding. He's getting married, and he invited us to attend. Lucas's expression sharpened with understanding beyond his years. He invited us after all this time. Why? I think, Sophia said carefully, he wants to show us how successful he's become. He probably expects us to look impressed, or maybe even sad that we're not part of his life. But we're not sad, Mateo said matter-of-factly. We have a great life. Why would we be sad about missing out on someone who didn't want us? Sophia felt a surge of pride at her son's emotional intelligence. You're absolutely right, and that's exactly what I want him to see, that we're not sad, we're not struggling, and we don't need anything from him. Lucas leaned forward, his dark eyes so much like Victor's but filled with warmth. Victor had never possessed showing keen interest. So this is like proving a point? Something like that. I want him to see who we are as a family. I want him to understand that his opinion of us was wrong. Are you nervous? Mateo asked, always attuned to others' emotions. Sophia considered the question. No, sweetheart, I'm not nervous anymore. I'm ready. Then we'll be ready too. Lucas declared with characteristic confidence, we'll be the best dressed, most polite kids there. And we'll make you proud, Mateo added, reaching for her hand. That afternoon, Sophia closed her office early and picked up Clara for what she thought of as a reconnaissance mission. They drove to the Grand Belmont Hotel, where Sophia had arranged to meet with the event coordinator under the pretense of considering the venue for a high-profile client event. Mrs. Alvarez, Rebecca, the event coordinator, greeted them in the opulent lobby with genuine warmth. Sophia had worked with Rebecca on several occasions, and their professional relationship had evolved into mutual respect. Thank you for considering the Belmont for your client. Let me show you our premier ballroom. It's actually being set up for a major wedding this weekend, so you can see it at its most formal. Perfect, Sophia thought. The ballroom was breathtaking in its opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers, silk draping in ivory and gold, and round tables set with the finest Waterford crystal and sterling silver. White orchids and roses in elaborate arrangements created stunning centerpieces, and a string quartet was rehearsing near the raised platform, where the head table would be positioned. This is the Lane wedding, Rebecca explained proudly. 500 guests, unlimited budget, full black tie affair. Mr. Lane spared no expense. Ice sculptures, premium Dom Perignon champagne, and we even have the governor's security detail coordinating with our team. Sophia nodded appreciatively, while mentally cataloging every detail. The head table's elevated position would give Victor and his bride a perfect view of the entire room and ensure that every guest would see whoever made an entrance. The curved staircase leading into the ballroom was designed for dramatic arrivals, guaranteeing that anyone descending those steps would capture everyone's attention. The cocktail reception will be in the Rose Garden, Rebecca continued, leading them outside to a beautifully landscaped terrace overlooking the city skyline. Weather permitting, of course, though the forecast looks perfect. As they toured the facilities, Sophia's strategy began to crystallize. She would arrive during the cocktail hour, when guests would be mingling outdoors, giving her room to establish her presence among the crowd before the formal dinner. The entrance down that dramatic staircase would ensure maximum impact when she and the twins made their way to the ballroom. This is absolutely stunning, Clara murmured as they concluded the tour. Are you sure you're ready for this level of spectacle? I've never been more ready for anything in my life, Sophia replied with quiet conviction. The following Saturday, Sophia and Clara embarked on what Clara had dubbed Operation Transformation Phase 2. Their first stop was Nordstrom, where Sophia had an appointment with Patricia, a personal shopper she'd worked with for several important business events. I need something absolutely spectacular, Sophia told Patricia. Black tie wedding guest. And I want to make an unforgettable impression. This is probably the most important entrance I'll ever make." Patricia's eyes lit up with the challenge. "What's your budget?" "Whatever it takes to be perfect," Sophia said without hesitation. 3 hours later, they had found the ideal dress, a stunning midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta that hugged Sophia's figure perfectly before flowing into an elegant train. The color was sophisticated and dramatic, bringing out her dark eyes and complementing her olive skin tone beautifully. The design was unmistakably expensive and current. Clearly the work of a master designer. "Mija, you look like you should be on the red carpet." Clara breathed as Sophia emerged from the dressing room for the final fitting. "That's exactly the look I want," Sophia replied, studying herself in the three-way mirror. This wasn't just a dress. It was armor, confidence made visible. The twins were easier but no less important to outfit properly. At the formal wear shop, Lucas and Matteo approached the task of selecting tuxedos with the seriousness of young men who understood the importance of the occasion. "Do we look like we belong at a fancy wedding?" Matteo asked, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror with careful precision. "You look like young gentlemen," Sophia replied proudly. "But remember, how you behave will be just as important as how you look." "Don't worry, Mom," Lucas said confidently, standing straighter in his perfectly tailored jacket. "We know how to handle ourselves at formal events. We've been doing it for years." He was right. Thanks to the charity galas, business dinners, and cultural events Sophia had taken them to as part of their education, both boys were comfortable in formal settings and knew how to interact with adults with appropriate respect and confidence. The week leading up to the wedding, Sophia threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she brought to her most important business deals. She scheduled appointments with her hairstylist and makeup artist, arranged for a luxury car service, and even hired a photographer to document their preparation. She wanted pictures of this transformation. But more than the external preparations, Sophia spent time preparing mentally and emotionally. She practiced potential conversations with Victor, imagined various scenarios, and steeled herself for whatever reaction her appearance might provoke. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked as they sat in Sophia's living room the night before the wedding, going over final details one more time. Surprisingly, no, Sophia replied honestly. "I feel peaceful, like I'm finally getting the chance to close a chapter that's been open too long." Clara studied her sister's face in the lamplight. "You've really changed, you know, not just since Victor left, but even in the past few weeks, since you got that invitation. You seem powerful." Sophia considered that assessment. "I think I finally understand something that took me 10 years to learn. Victor's opinion of me never mattered. It was never about whether I was good enough for him. It was about whether he was good enough for me. And the answer to that question is very clear now." Clara smiled. "Those boys of yours are lucky to have you as their mother." "I'm the lucky one," Sophia said, glancing toward the stairs where Lucas and Matteo were sleeping. "They saved me. Having something so precious to fight for made me stronger than I ever knew I could be." As they finalized the last details, Sophia felt a deep sense of completion settling over her. Tomorrow wasn't about revenge or even vindication. Really, tomorrow was about truth, showing Victor exactly what he'd chosen to throw away and proving to herself that she'd not only survived his cruelty, but had transformed it into something beautiful. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Sophia woke early and began the process of transformation with the methodical precision of a general preparing for the most important battle of her career. The hairstylist arrived first, creating an elegant chignon that was sophisticated without being overly formal, the kind of hairstyle that whispered rather than shouted its expense. The makeup artist followed, enhancing Sophia's natural beauty with subtle glamour that would photograph beautifully under the ballroom's lighting. When it was time to dress, Clara helped Sophia into the midnight blue gown, carefully arranging the train and adjusting the delicate shoulder straps. The dress fit like it had been made for her, highlighting every curve while maintaining perfect elegance. The jewelry was the final touch. Diamond earrings she'd bought herself to celebrate Elegantia Event's 5th anniversary and a matching pendant that had been her gift to herself when the twins were accepted at St. Joseph's Academy. Each piece represented a victory, a milestone achieved through her own determination. "Boys," Sophia called upstairs. "Time to get ready." Lucas and Matteo appeared in their tuxedos, bow ties perfectly straight, hair neatly combed, with just enough natural wave to look effortless. They looked so handsome and grown-up that Sophia felt tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. "Do we look okay, Mom?" Matteo asked, a hint of nervousness finally showing. You look perfect, Sophia said, meaning it completely. You both look like the incredible young men you're becoming. Lucas straightened his shoulders, assuming the posture of confidence that came so naturally to him. Are you ready to show everyone who we are? Sophia looked at herself and her sons in the full-length mirror one final time. The woman looking back at her bore no resemblance to the broken, desperate person Victor had discarded 10 years ago. This woman was confident, successful, and surrounded by love. Yes, she said firmly, I'm ready. As their car service arrived precisely on time, Sophia felt a strange sense of completion. For 10 years, she'd been building toward this moment without even knowing it. Every late-night studying, every business success, every proud moment with her sons had been preparing her for this confrontation. Victor thought he was inviting the old Sophia to witness his triumph. Instead, he was about to meet the woman she'd become in his absence and discover exactly what he'd been foolish enough to throw away. Let's go show someone what a terrible mistake looks like, she said quietly, as they settled into the car. Tonight, Victor Lane would learn that some people don't stay broken. Some people rebuild themselves into something stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely more valuable than what they'd been before. Chapter 7. The Grand Entrance. The Blacktown car pulled up to the Grand Belmont Hotel at precisely 7:15, fashionably late as Sophia had planned. Through the tinted windows, she could see elegantly dressed guests mingling on the rose garden terrace, champagne glasses catching the golden light of the setting sun, laughter and conversation creating the perfect backdrop for high society at play. Are you ready, boys? Sophia asked, checking Lucas and Mateo one final time. Both twins sat straight in their seats, looking remarkably composed for 10-year-olds about to attend what was clearly the social event of the season. We're ready, Mom, Lucas said with quiet confidence that reminded Sophia of herself before important business presentations. Remember what we practiced. Firm handshakes, eye contact, and pleased to meet you when introduced to adults. Mateo nodded solemnly, his more sensitive nature showing in the careful way he adjusted his bow tie. And we stay close to you, unless you tell us otherwise. We're representing our family tonight. Sophia's heart swelled with pride. These weren't just well-behaved children. They were young gentlemen who would hold their own in any company, regardless of wealth or social status. Victor had no idea what he'd missed by abandoning them. The driver opened their door, and Sophia stepped out first, the midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown flowing around her like liquid silk. She could feel the subtle shift in energy as nearby guests noticed her arrival. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who'd once felt intimidated by fancy venues and wealthy people. Tonight, she belonged here more than most of the guests inside. Lucas and Mateo flanked her on either side, their matching tuxedos perfectly tailored, their bearing confident but respectful. Together, the three of them looked like what they were, a family of substance and success who had earned their place in any room. Mrs. Alvarez, the maitre d', Michael, greeted her with genuine warmth and recognition. What a pleasure to see you again. Your work on the Baxter merger celebration was absolutely magnificent. Sophia smiled, remembering the several high-profile events she'd coordinated at this hotel over the past 2 years. Thank you, Michael. We're here for the Lane Bennett wedding, of course. The cocktail reception is in the Rose Garden, and dinner will begin in the main ballroom at 8. May I say, you and your young gentleman look absolutely stunning this evening. As they walked through the hotel's opulent lobby toward the garden terrace, Sophia caught glimpses of herself and the boys in the mirrored walls. They looked like they'd stepped out of the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine, elegant, confident, and clearly accustomed to this level of sophistication. The moment they stepped onto the terrace, Sophia felt the ripple effect that always accompanied a truly dramatic entrance. Conversations didn't stop abruptly, but there was a subtle shift in energy, a turning of heads, and the kind of curious attention that successful, beautiful people naturally command. My goodness! She heard a woman whisper to her companion. Who is that stunning woman with those handsome boys? They look like they should be in a magazine. I don't recognize them. Another voice murmured. But they're clearly somebody important. Look at that dress, that's Oscar de la Renta if I've ever seen it. Sophia accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter and surveyed the crowd with practiced ease. She recognized several faces from her own professional and social circles. Politicians, business leaders, cultural figures she'd encountered through Elegantia events or her community involvement. These were Victor's people now. the elite circle he'd always aspired to join. What Victor didn't realize was that many of these people were also Sophia's people now, earned through her own merit rather than marriage. "Sophia Alvarez," a familiar voice called out, and Sophia turned to see Senator Caldwell's wife approaching with obvious delight. "I had no idea you'd be here. You look absolutely radiant, my dear." "Mrs. Caldwell, how lovely to see you," Sophia replied warmly. "Allow me to introduce my sons, Lucas and Mateo." Both boys stepped forward with perfect manners, offering polite handshakes and warm smiles that immediately charmed the older woman. "What delightful young men, Mrs. Caldwell said, clearly impressed by their poise and confidence. "Are you enjoying your summer break from school?" "Yes, ma'am," Lucas replied with easy confidence. "We're looking forward to starting 6th grade at St. Joseph's Academy in the fall. This summer, we've been helping our mother with some of her charity events." "St. Joseph's? Excellent school. My grandson attends there as well." "Mrs. Caldwell turned back to Sophia with curious interest. "I didn't realize you knew the bride and groom." Sophia's smile didn't waver, though she could feel the weight of careful attention from nearby guests who were clearly listening. "I have a connection to the groom from years past. I thought it would be appropriate to attend his celebration." As Mrs. Caldwell moved on, Sophia noticed more familiar faces beginning to approach, but not with the cautious curiosity she might have expected. Instead, they came with the warmth reserved for respected colleagues and friends. "Mrs. Alvarez," another voice called out, and Sophia found herself greeting Dr. Patricia Gomez, the mayor's chief of staff. "I didn't expect to see you here." "How wonderful. Dr. Gomez. What a pleasure. I was just telling my husband about the exceptional job you did, coordinating our foundation's gala last month. The logistics alone were incredible. But the way you made everyone feel welcomed and valued, that's what made the evening truly special." More introductions followed in rapid succession. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, whose annual dinner Sophia had organized. Judge Larson, whose daughter's wedding had been one of Elegancia Events' signature successes, and 3 prominent businessmen whose corporate events she'd coordinated with flawless execution. Each interaction served to establish her presence and status among the wedding guests. To these people, she wasn't some unknown party crasher. She was Sophia Alvarez, the successful entrepreneur they'd worked with professionally and come to respect personally. "Mom," Mateo whispered during a brief lull in the introductions. "Everyone seems to know you and like you." "I've worked hard to build relationships in this community," Sophia replied softly. "Tonight, that work is paying off in ways I never expected." From across the terrace, she caught sight of Victor for the first time in 10 years. He was holding court near the fountain, surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits, all laughing at something he'd said with the kind of appreciative attention that successful, charismatic men naturally attract. At 38, Victor was still undeniably handsome, his dark hair now showing distinguished touches of silver at the temples, his physique maintained by what were probably expensive personal trainers and carefully controlled nutrition. He wore success like a perfectly tailored suit, and his confidence bordered on the kind of arrogance that comes from never being seriously challenged. But as Sophia watched him from across the crowded terrace, she felt absolutely nothing. No flutter of old attraction, no pang of regret or longing, no anger or bitterness. He was simply a stranger now, someone from her past who no longer had any power over her emotions or self-worth. Victor hadn't noticed her yet, but several people in his circle had begun glancing in her direction with obvious curiosity and what looked like growing recognition. The whispered conversations were spreading through the crowd like ripples on water as word traveled about the elegant woman and her remarkable sons. "Victor, darling," a high, breathless voice cut through the ambient conversation, and Sophia saw Rachel Bennett approaching Victor's group with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested she was accustomed to being the center of attention. The bride-to-be was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, and perfectly groomed in the way that only unlimited money and professional styling could achieve. Her pre-wedding cocktail dress was clearly designer, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary. But there was something brittle about her beauty, something that suggested it required constant maintenance and validation to sustain itself. Rachel whispered something in Victor's ear, gesturing discreetly in Sophia's direction with the practiced subtlety of someone accustomed to social maneuvering. Sophia watched as Victor's expression shifted from casual attention to sharp focus, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed directly on her. The moment their gazes met across the crowded terrace, Sophia saw Victor's face transform completely. First confusion, as if he was seeing a mirage, then recognition, followed by what could only be described as shock, as he took in her elegant appearance and obvious comfort in these expensive surroundings. This was clearly not the broken, desperate woman he'd expected to see. This was not someone who could be dismissed or pitied. This was a woman who obviously belonged in this world of wealth and influence, who commanded respect and attention in her own right. But it wasn't until Victor's gaze shifted to Lucas and Matteo, standing confidently beside their mother like young princes, that Sophia saw true comprehension dawn in his eyes. Lucas, with his strong jaw and natural authority, was unmistakably Victor's son. The resemblance was so strong it was almost startling. The same bone structure, the same way of holding his shoulders, the same inherent confidence. Matteo, gentler but equally poised, carried Victor's distinctive features softened by Sophia's more delicate bone structure. There was no question, no possibility of doubt. These were Victor Lane's children, raised to be exceptional young men despite, or perhaps because of his complete absence from their lives. Sophia watched Victor's face go visibly pale as the full implications hit him. These weren't just any children attending the wedding. These were the sons he'd rejected, the burden he'd refused to acknowledge, and they were clearly thriving, clearly loved, clearly being raised with advantages and opportunities he'd never imagined they'd have. Holy shit, she heard someone near Victor mutter. And she realized that others in his group were beginning to notice the resemblance as well. Rachel tugged on Victor's arm, saying something that looked urgent and increasingly panicked. But Victor seemed frozen in place, staring across the terrace at the family he'd abandoned. Sophia decided it was time to take control of the situation. With Lucas and Matteo beside her, she began walking slowly across the terrace toward Victor's group. Conversations parted before them like water, and she could feel every eye in the garden following their progress with fascination and growing understanding. "Boys," she said quietly as they approached, "I want you to meet someone who's been very important in our story, even though he wasn't part of our lives." Lucas and Matteo maintained their composure, but Sophia could sense their heightened attention. They knew this moment was significant, even if they didn't fully understand all the implications. "Hello, Victor," Sophia said when they were close enough for normal conversation, her voice warm but controlled, carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over their section of the terrace. "Thank you for the kind invitation to your wedding. It's been enlightening to see how well some people have done for themselves." Victor opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Up close, the resemblance between him and the boys was even more pronounced and undeniable. Lucas had Victor's exact jawline and the same distinctive way of tilting his head when listening. Matteo had Victor's dark eyebrows and the same elegant hands. "These are my sons," Sophia continued smoothly, her voice carrying with perfect clarity. "Lucas and Matteo. Boys, this is Mr. Lane, the groom we came to congratulate." Both boys stepped forward with the impeccable manners Sophia had taught them, offering polite handshakes and appropriate greetings. But Sophia could see Victor's hand trembling as he shook hands with Lucas, his eyes searching the boy's face with growing recognition, and what might have been the first stirrings of regret. How old are they?" Victor asked, his voice thick with shock. 10, Sophia replied calmly. "They'll be 11 in February. Twins. As you can see, the math was simple enough for everyone present to calculate instantly. 10 years ago, Victor would have been married to Sophia. These children would have been born during or just after their marriage." Rachel's eyes widened as she looked between Victor and the boys, clearly beginning to understand the situation with growing horror. "Victor," Rachel said slowly, her voice rising with disbelief, "are these?" "Yes," Sophia answered for him, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over, not just their group, but most of the terrace. "These are Victor's sons, the children he chose not to be part of their lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other guests were beginning to pick up on the drama unfolding, whispered conversations spreading the revelation through the crowd like wildfire. Victor looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Rachel appeared to be in complete shock, her perfectly made-up face frozen in an expression of horrified realization. But Sophia felt only a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. This was the moment she'd been building toward for 10 years, not to destroy Victor, but to show him exactly what he'd thrown away through his own cruelty and short-sightedness. "Congratulations on your wedding," she said graciously, her voice carrying across the increasingly quiet terrace. I hope you'll both be very happy together." As she turned to walk away with Lucas and Matteo, Sophia heard Rachel's voice rising behind them in what sounded like the beginning of a very public and very heated argument. The evening was just beginning, and already Victor's perfect wedding was starting to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. Chapter 8. The Revelation. As Sophia walked away from Victor with Lucas and Matteo beside her, the elegant cocktail atmosphere of the Rose Garden began to shift into something far more intense and dramatic. Behind them, Rachel's voice was rising with each word, sharp with confusion and growing outrage. "Victor, what is she talking about? You have children? You told me you'd never been seriously involved with anyone before me." The whispered conversations that had started around Victor's group were spreading through the crowd like wildfire, creating an undercurrent of excitement and scandal that transformed the wedding reception into something resembling a public tribunal. Sophia guided the boys toward a quieter section of the terrace near the fountain, where they could observe without being in the direct center of attention. But even as she moved away from the confrontation, she could feel the weight of hundreds of curious gazes as word spread through the assembled guests with the speed that only truly explosive gossip could achieve. "Mom," Lucas said quietly, accepting a glass of sparkling cider from a passing waiter. "That man. Mr. Lane, he looked like he'd seen a ghost when he saw us." "In a way, he did, Mijo," Sophia replied. Watching the drama unfold across the terrace, sometimes people are surprised by the consequences of their choices. Matteo, ever the more emotionally perceptive of the twins, looked thoughtful as he studied the growing commotion around Victor. "Are you okay? You seem different, strong, but different." Before Sophia could answer, Mrs. Caldwell appeared at her elbow, her face flushed with excitement and barely contained indignation. "My dear," she said in a stage whisper that carried clearly to nearby guests, "is it true? Are those boys Victor Lane's sons?" Sophia nodded calmly, maintaining her composure despite the intensity of the moment. "Yes, they are." Mrs. Caldwell's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine shock. "But I had no idea he'd been married before. And such handsome, well-mannered boys, they're clearly exceptional children." The conversation was drawing attention from other guests, who were trying to look like they weren't eavesdropping while obviously hanging on every word. "How long were you married?" asked Dr. Gomez, who had appeared as if drawn by the magnetic pull of developing scandal. 3 years, Sophia replied evenly. "We divorced when I was pregnant with the twins." A collective gasp rose from the growing circle of listeners. Dr. Gomez's professional composure cracked as she processed the implications. "He left you when you were pregnant with twins?" Victor made his position very clear. Sophia said, with measured calm, "He wasn't interested in being a father." "Good Lord," breathed Judge Larson, who had joined the growing audience. "That poor girl over there is about to marry a man who abandoned his pregnant wife and newborn children." Across the terrace, the drama was escalating rapidly. Rachel's voice had risen to a pitch that was carrying clearly across the entire garden, and Victor looked increasingly desperate as he tried to explain or defend himself to his bride and the growing circle of shocked guests surrounding them. "You abandoned your pregnant wife?" Rachel's voice cracked with disbelief and growing hysteria. "Victor, how could you not tell me something like this? How could you lie to me for 2 entire years? It's complicated." Victor's voice carried across the crowd, sounding weak and defensive. "You don't understand the circumstances." "Complicated?" Rachel's laugh was sharp and broken. "What's complicated about being a decent human being? What's complicated about taking care of your own children?" Sophia watched as more prominent guests began to gravitate toward the confrontation, drawn by the spectacle and clearly horrified by what they were learning about Victor's character. Senator Caldwell pushed through the crowd, his political instincts recognizing a moment of public judgment. "Is this true, Victor?" he demanded. "Did you really abandon your pregnant wife and children?" "They weren't. I mean, the situation was—" Victor was stammering now, looking around desperately for support that clearly wasn't coming. "The situation was that you called me nothing and walked away from your pregnant wife." Sophia's voice cut through Victor's attempted explanation, carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet crowd. A visible shudder ran through the assembled guests as the full cruelty of Victor's actions became clear. "You called her nothing?" Dr. Gomez's medical training was evident in the way she examined Victor like a particularly disgusting specimen. "A pregnant woman carrying your children, and you called her nothing?" Mayor Baxter stepped forward, his political authority lending weight to his words. "Victor, I've supported your business ventures. attended your fundraisers, considered you a friend. How could you lie to all of us about something this fundamental to your character?" "I didn't lie, exactly," Victor said desperately. I moved on. I started over." "You abandoned them," Rachel shrieked, and now her voice was breaking with genuine emotional pain. "What kind of monster abandons his own babies? What kind of psychopath leaves a woman alone and pregnant with twins?" The crowd had grown larger and more hostile with each revelation. Sophia could see cell phones appearing as guests began recording what was clearly going to be the scandal of the social season. "Mrs. Alvarez," Judge Larson approached Sophia with the kind of judicial gravity that commanded respect. "I hope you don't mind my saying, but your sons are remarkable young men. I've been watching them handle this situation, and their composure is extraordinary." "Thank you, Your Honor," Sophia replied. "They're the joy of my life." "I can see why," the judge said, glancing toward the chaos surrounding Victor with undisguised disgust. "May I ask, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but is it true that their father completely abandoned them?" "Victor made it clear that he wanted no part of our children's lives," Sophia said simply, "so I raised them on my own." Judge Larson's expression darkened with professional outrage. "A man who abandons his children isn't much of a man at all. In my opinion, you've clearly done an exceptional job raising them without him." Dr. Patricia Monroe, the city's most prominent pediatrician, joined their conversation with obvious indignation. "I couldn't help but overhear. Those are beautiful, well-adjusted children, and they clearly adore you. Their father really left when you were pregnant." "He made his choice," Sophia said diplomatically, though her calm demeanor was making Victor's actions seem even more reprehensible by contrast, and clearly it was the wrong choice. Dr. Monroe replied firmly, "Those boys are exceptional, and you should be very proud of the job you've done raising them." As more guests approached to express their support and admiration, Sophia realized that Victor's plan to humiliate her had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Instead of appearing as the pathetic ex-wife he'd expected, she was being embraced by the very society he'd hoped to impress. The guests were seeing her as the successful, dignified woman she'd become, while Victor was being revealed as someone capable of unconscionable cruelty toward his own family. Meanwhile, the confrontation between Victor and Rachel was reaching a crescendo. The bride-to-be had attracted quite an audience, her voice rising with each accusation as her perfect wedding day dissolved into public humiliation. "You told me I was your first real love," Rachel was saying, her perfectly styled hair beginning to come loose as she gestured wildly. "You said you'd never been married before. You said you'd been waiting your whole life for someone like me." "Rachel, please, let me explain," Victor began, but she cut him off with devastating fury. "Explain what? That you lied to me about everything? That you have children you never mentioned? That you abandoned a pregnant woman carrying your twins?" Rachel's voice broke completely. "What kind of monster does that? What kind of person can look at a pregnant woman and call her nothing?" Sophia found herself feeling an unexpected moment of sympathy for Rachel. However shallow the young woman might have seemed initially, she was genuinely shocked and hurt by these revelations. She was learning, in the most public way possible, that the man she was about to marry was capable of cruelty beyond her imagination. "Look at them," Senator Caldwell said, his politician's voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd as he gestured towards Sophia and the twins. "Look at those boys, Victor. Your sons. Look at what their mother accomplished without you." Lucas stepped forward with remarkable poise for a 10-year-old, his voice clear and steady despite the chaos around them. "Mr. Lane," he said, and the crowd quieted to hear him. "My mother told us you didn't want children. She said you chose not to be part of our lives. We turned out fine without you," Mateo added quietly, but his words carried like thunder in the stillness. "Mom made sure we had everything we needed. We don't need anything from you now." The crowd murmured its approval, and Sophia could see tears in several women's eyes as they watched these remarkable children defend their mother with such dignity and maturity. "Children shouldn't have to be this strong," whispered Mrs. Thompson, the society matron whose opinion could make or break social reputations. "They shouldn't have to protect their mother from their own father's cruelty." Rachel suddenly broke away from Victor and walked directly over to Sophia, tears streaming down her face, her wedding makeup ruined beyond repair. "I am so sorry," she said, taking Sophia's hands in hers, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. "I'm sorry for what he did to you. I'm sorry I almost married such a monster without knowing what he was capable of." "You're not responsible for his choices," Sophia replied gently. And even in her grace toward Rachel, everyone could see the fundamental kindness that Victor had been too blind to value. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel announced, turning to address the crowd with the kind of dramatic flair that would be talked about for years to come, "there will be no wedding tonight. I cannot and will not marry a man who could look at a pregnant woman carrying his children and call her nothing. I cannot bind my life to someone with such a complete absence of basic human decency." The silence that followed was broken by a single clap from Judge Larson. Then Dr. Monroe joined in, then Senator Caldwell. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding Rachel's decision, showing their approval for her rejection of Victor. The sound of that applause, hundreds of the city's most influential people showing their support for Rachel's decision to abandon Victor, was devastating. Sophia watched Victor's face crumble as he realized that his entire social circle was not only rejecting him but celebrating his abandonment. "Rachel, wait," Victor called desperately as she began to walk away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a symbol of his destroyed dreams. "Please, we can work through this. I can change." She stopped and turned back, her face a mask of disgust and finality. "Change, Victor? You abandoned newborn babies? You left a woman alone with twins. There's no coming back from that level of cruelty. There's no redemption for what you did to your own family." As Rachel walked away, her exit marking the official end of Victor's wedding and social standing, the crowd began to disperse, but they didn't leave quietly. Each departure was marked by a public declaration, every guest making sure their rejection of Victor was clearly understood. "Don't contact my office about those zoning permits," Senator Caldwell announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I don't do business with men who abandon their children." "The Caldwell endorsement is withdrawn from all your projects," added his wife with equal volume. "Consider our political relationship terminated. My medical practice will no longer use your properties for our charity events." Dr. Monroe declared, "We can't be associated with someone who abandons children. The mayor's office will be reviewing all city contracts with your company," Mayor Baxter announced with the authority of public office. "The people of this city deserve better than to do business with someone capable of such cruelty." One by one, the most powerful people in the city lined up to publicly reject Victor, but not before stopping to express their admiration for Sophia and her sons. "Mrs. Alvarez, you've raised remarkable children," Judge Larson said, shaking Lucas and Mateo's hands with formal respect. "It's clear they've had an exceptional mother who taught them dignity and strength. Thank you for your grace tonight," added Mrs. Thompson, the society matron whose approval Victor had always craved. "A lesser woman would have caused a scene or sought revenge. You've shown extraordinary character. I'd like to discuss having Elegantia Events coordinate our foundation's annual gala," Senator Caldwell said, his business card appearing in Sophia's hand. "After witnessing your composure and dignity tonight, I'm convinced you're exactly the kind of professional we want to work with." Victor stood alone by the fountain, where his engagement ring still lay forgotten, watching his entire life's work evaporate, as the very people he'd hoped to impress rushed to embrace the family he'd thrown away. The contrast was brutal and undeniable. Sophia, surrounded by respect and admiration, while he faced nothing but disgust and abandonment. As the crowd thinned and the last of the guests departed, Victor was left with the wreckage of his wedding, his reputation, and his future. But more than that, he was left with the inescapable knowledge of exactly what he'd lost through his own cruelty and stupidity. The woman he'd called nothing had become everything that mattered, while he had revealed himself to be exactly that, nothing. Chapter 9. The Humiliation. The Grand Belmont Hotel's Rose Garden had transformed from Victor Lane's moment of triumph into the stage for his complete and utter destruction. As the last of the wedding guests departed, leaving behind only scattered rose petals and the echoes of his social annihilation, Victor stood alone beside the fountain, where Rachel's engagement ring still lay forgotten on the stone patio. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the past hour. Victor picked up the diamond ring, a 3-carat symbol of the life he'd thought he was building, and turned it over in his trembling hands. Just 2 hours ago, he'd been the groom at the social event of the season. Now he was a pariah, publicly rejected by his bride and condemned by every person whose opinion mattered in the city's business and social circles. "Mr. Lane," a hotel employee approached cautiously. "Sir, we need to begin cleaning up the ballroom. Dinner has been canceled." Victor looked up at the young man, hardly recognizing his own voice when he spoke. Yes, of course. Send the bills to my office." But even as he said it, Victor knew that his office might not exist much longer. The political and business connections he'd spent 15 years cultivating had evaporated in the span of a single evening. Senator Caldwell's endorsement, Mayor Baxter's contracts, Judge Larson's legal referrals all gone, publicly withdrawn in front of hundreds of witnesses. 3 days later, Victor sat in his lawyer's office, staring at a stack of documents that represented the beginning of the end. His attorney, Daniel Pierce, looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the papers spread across his mahogany desk. The Caldwell family has officially withdrawn their political endorsement from all your development projects, Daniel said without preamble. The Crestview Heights project is dead in the water without their support. The city council won't approve the zoning changes. Victor nodded numbly. The Crestview Heights development had been his flagship project, a $50 million luxury residential complex that would have cemented his reputation as the city's premier developer. What about the other projects? Daniel consulted his notes with the grim efficiency of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. The mayor's office has announced they're reviewing all existing contracts with Lane Development for compliance and ethical standards. That's political speak for, we're looking for reasons to cancel everything. And Judge Larson, he's already moved his family's legal work to Thompson and Associates. But that's not the worst part. Daniel leaned forward, his expression grave. 3 of your major investors called this morning. They're pulling out of the Lincoln Street project. They cited concerns about your personal character affecting the company's reputation. Victor felt the room spinning around him. The Lincoln Street project was his company's largest undertaking, a mixed-use development that had required 2 years of planning and represented nearly 60% of his firm's projected revenue for the next 3 years. How much? Victor asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. If Lincoln Street fails, you're looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. The investors want their money back immediately, $8, $2 million. The bank is calling in your construction loans. And there's something else. Daniel hesitated, which was never a good sign from a lawyer who'd been handling sensitive matters for Victor for over a decade. What? Your ex-wife's divorce settlement is being reviewed by the state attorney general's office. Someone and I have my suspicions about who filed a complaint, alleging that you deliberately hid assets during the divorce proceedings 10 years ago. Victor's blood ran cold. That's impossible. We disclosed everything. Did you? Daniel's voice was sharp. Because I've been going through the old files, Victor, and there are some discrepancies. The Thompson account, for instance. You had a significant trust fund from your grandmother that wasn't mentioned in the settlement. The Thompson account. Victor had completely forgotten about his grandmother's trust, $200,000 that had been sitting untouched in a separate bank, managed by a family friend. He'd convinced himself it didn't count because he'd never accessed it during his marriage to Sophia. If they can prove you deliberately concealed assets, Daniel continued, Sophia could be entitled to half of everything you owned then, plus interest and penalties. We're talking about potentially millions of dollars. Victor slumped in his chair, understanding for the first time the full scope of his destruction. It wasn't just his current projects failing. His entire financial foundation was crumbling. 1 week later, the scandal had spread beyond the city's social circles into the business community with the devastating efficiency of a viral infection. The local newspaper's society page had run a detailed account of the wedding disaster under the headline, "Prominent Developer's Wedding Canceled After Shocking Revelations About Abandoned Family." But it was the follow-up story in the business section that truly destroyed Victor's remaining credibility. Lane Development faces. Multiple investigations detailed the city's review of his contracts, the state's examination of his decade-old divorce settlement, and the exodus of investors and business partners who no longer wanted to be associated with his name. Victor's phone, once constantly ringing with opportunities and invitations, had gone silent. His assistant had resigned, claiming she couldn't handle the negative attention the office was receiving. 3 of his most experienced project managers had been poached by competing firms who saw an opportunity to acquire talent at discount prices. Most devastating of all was the call from his banker, a man Victor had considered a friend for over 8 years. "I'm sorry, Victor," Robert Yang had said, his voice genuinely regretful, "but the bank's board met last night. We're calling in your loans, all of them." "Robert, you know I'm good for the money. This is just a temporary setback." "It's not about the money, Victor. It's about reputation. The bank can't be associated with someone who, well, with what happened at your wedding. Our board includes several prominent women who were there that night. They were very clear about their feelings." Victor had hung up the phone and sat in his empty office, looking out at the city he'd once thought he owned. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. He was no longer a player in the city's power structure. He was a cautionary tale, 2 months later, the bankruptcy proceedings had been swift and merciless. Victor sat in a small conference room in the county courthouse, signing papers that liquidated the last remnants of his business empire. His lawyer, a court-appointed attorney since Daniel Pierce had declined to continue representing him, handed him document after document with mechanical efficiency. The penthouse sold for $1. $2 million, the attorney said without emotion. After outstanding mortgages and liens, that leaves approximately $300,000. The cars have been repossessed. Your investment portfolio has been liquidated to pay creditors. Victor signed each paper mechanically, watching his life's work reduced to a series of legal documents and financial statements. What about the Thompson account investigation? The attorney consulted his notes. The state attorney general's office reached a settlement with your ex-wife's representatives. You'll be paying $850,000 in back support and concealed assets, plus legal fees. The payment plan extends over 5 years, nearly $1 million to Sophia, money she would probably use to expand her business or invest in her son's education. The irony was overwhelming. He would be paying for the success of the family he'd abandoned. Where do I stand financially? After all debts and settlements are paid, you'll have approximately $50,000 to your name. No business assets, no real estate, no investments. You'll need to find employment. Employment. Victor Lane, who had once owned a multi-million-dollar development company, who had dined with governors and senators, would need to find a job working for someone else. 6 months after the wedding, Victor stood in the lobby of Carter and Associates, a mid-tier real estate firm that specialized in strip mall developments and small commercial properties, exactly the kind of projects he'd once looked down on with disdain. He wore his last good suit, the only one he'd been able to keep from his former wardrobe, and carried a resume that felt like a confession of failure. Mr. Lane, the receptionist's voice was professionally neutral, but Victor could see the recognition in her eyes. Everyone in the city's real estate community knew his story by now. I have an appointment with Mr. Carter about the associate position. Thomas Carter was a man Victor had once dismissed as small-time, someone who handled the projects that weren't worth a major developer's attention. Now Victor was hoping Carter would give him a chance to rebuild his career from the bottom up. Victor, Carter said, greeting him with the kind of cautious professionalism reserved for fallen titans. Thank you for coming in. Please, sit down. The interview was humbling in ways Victor hadn't anticipated. Carter asked basic questions about residential development, commercial leasing, and project management subjects. Victor had once known intimately but hadn't needed to think about in detail for years. He'd become so accustomed to operating at the executive level that he'd lost touch with the fundamental skills of the business. I'll be honest with you, Victor, Carter said at the end of their meeting. Your experience is impressive, but your reputation is challenging. This is a small firm. We can't afford to be associated with controversy. I understand, Victor said, hating how desperate he sounded, but I'm willing to start over. I'll take any position you have available. Carter studied him for a long moment. There's a junior associate position open. It's basically entry-level work. Property inspections, document filing, client follow-up calls. The salary is $45,000 a year. Sishawu, Ling. Victor had once spent more than that on a single vacation, but he nodded eagerly. I'll take it. One condition, Carter said. You never mention your connection to this firm in any public context. No networking events, no industry conferences, no social media. You're here to work quietly and rebuild your professional reputation through competence, not connections. Victor agreed, understanding that he was being offered a chance at redemption, but only if he accepted complete anonymity and professional humility. 1 year after the wedding, Victor lived in a studio apartment across town from his former penthouse, in a building where the elevator sometimes didn't work, and the air conditioning was a luxury he couldn't always afford. His neighbors were young professionals just starting their careers, graduate students, and service workers, people who reminded him daily of how far he'd fallen. Every morning, he took the bus to Carter and Associates, where he spent his days conducting property inspections, filing documents, and making follow-up calls to clients about lease renewals and maintenance issues. The work was honest but mundane, the kind of detailed, unglamorous labor that kept the real estate business functioning but never made headlines. His colleagues were polite but distant. Everyone knew who he was and what had happened to him. He was a cautionary tale walking among them, proof that success without character was ultimately hollow and unsustainable. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or the loss of social status. The hardest part was the knowledge that he'd brought all of this on himself through his own cruelty and short-sightedness. Every evening, as Victor rode the bus home through the city he'd once thought he owned, he would sometimes catch glimpses of his former life. The buildings he'd developed, the restaurants where he'd once been a VIP, the social venues where he was no longer welcome, and occasionally he would see news of Sophia's continued success. Her company had been featured in national business magazines. She'd opened a second office in the state capital. She'd been appointed to the mayor's Economic Development Council, the same council that had once sought Victor's input and now refused to work with him. The woman he'd called nothing had become everything he'd once pretended to be. Successful, respected, and genuinely valued by her community. Meanwhile, he had become exactly what he'd accused her of being: nothing. Victor Lane had wanted to humiliate his ex-wife at his wedding. Instead, he had orchestrated the most complete and devastating destruction of his own life imaginable. And unlike the temporary setbacks that most people face, Victor's fall had been so public, so tied to his fundamental character, that there would be no real recovery. He would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he'd thrown away, and exactly what that moment of cruelty had cost him. Justice, it turned out, was far more thorough and permanent than revenge could ever be. Chapter 10. New Life. 2 years after Victor's wedding disaster, Sofia Alvarez stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new executive suite, watching the morning sun illuminate the city skyline from the 30th floor of the Pinnacle Tower. The bronze nameplate on the reception desk now read Elegancia Events International, Sofia Alvarez, founder and CEO. What had begun as survival cooking in a studio apartment had evolved into a luxury event planning empire with offices in 4 cities and clients across 3 countries. At 38, Sofia embodied success in ways she'd never imagined possible during those desperate early years. But more than the material achievements, what filled her with the deepest satisfaction was watching Lucas and Mateo flourish into remarkable young men who exceeded her highest expectations with each passing day. Mrs. Alvarez, her executive assistant, Catherine, appeared in the doorway with the morning schedule displayed on a tablet. The Forbes photographer is here for your cover shoot, and the reporter from Harvard Business Review wants to confirm your interview time for this afternoon. Send the photographer to the conference room, please. And remind me I need to leave by 3:30 for Lucas and Mateo's debate tournament finals. The Forbes cover story was titled "The Phoenix Rises: How Single Mothers Are Building America's Next Business Empires." Sofia was the featured entrepreneur, profiled alongside tech innovators and Wall Street executives as one of the country's most successful self-made businesswomen. But what made her story unique wasn't just the financial success. It was the complete transformation from victim to victor, from abandoned wife to industry leader. The Harvard Business Review interview was for a case study on crisis management and reputation building. Sofia's handling of Victor's wedding confrontation had become legendary in business schools as an example of how dignity and authenticity could triumph over attempted humiliation. "What's fascinating about your story," the Harvard professor had told her during their preliminary conversation, "is how you turned a moment of intended cruelty into the catalyst for unprecedented success. The guests at that wedding became your biggest advocates and clients." It was true. The society figures who had witnessed Victor's public disgrace had not only embraced Sofia personally, but had actively promoted her business within their exclusive networks. Within 6 months of the wedding, Elegancia Events had coordinated 3 gubernatorial campaign events, 2 corporate merger celebrations, and the city's most prestigious charity gala. But the real transformation had come in the months that followed, as Sofia's reputation for grace under pressure spread beyond local social circles into national business networks. The Forbes photographer worked efficiently, capturing Sofia in her element, consulting with her design team about an upcoming senator's daughter's wedding, reviewing expansion plans for the company's new West Coast office, and posing with the numerous awards that now lined her office walls. "Mrs. Alvarez," the photographer said as they wrapped up, "I have to ask, do you ever think about the man who tried to humiliate you at his wedding? Does he know how successful you've become?" Sofia considered the question carefully. She'd learned to be thoughtful about discussing Victor publicly, not out of concern for his feelings, but because she'd discovered that her success spoke louder than any words about revenge or justice. "Success isn't about proving someone else wrong," she replied. "It's about proving yourself right about your values, your capabilities, and your vision for what your life can become." But privately, Sophia did sometimes wonder about Victor's current circumstances. Through the interconnected world of business and social connections, she'd heard fragments of his story. The bankruptcy, the criminal investigation into hidden assets, the fall from penthouse to studio apartment. Just last month, Clara had mentioned seeing Victor at a bus stop downtown, looking older and smaller than Sophia remembered. He was working for a small real estate firm now, doing entry-level work that probably paid less in a year than Sophia's company earned in a week. The knowledge brought Sophia no satisfaction. Victor's downfall felt like a separate story from her success. His consequences were the result of his own choices, while her achievements were built on entirely different foundations. At 3:15, Sophia left her office early to attend the most important event of her day, watching Lucas and Matteo compete in the state championship debate tournament. At 12 years old, both twins had grown into exceptional young men, but their paths reflected their distinct personalities in fascinating ways. Lucas had been elected student body president at St. Joseph's Academy for the second consecutive year, making him the youngest student in the school's history to hold the position twice. His natural charisma and ethical leadership had caught the attention of several prestigious high schools, including two that had already extended scholarship offers for his freshman year. Matteo had won the state middle school creative writing championship and had just been accepted into Georgetown University's summer program for gifted young writers, an honor typically reserved for high school juniors and seniors. His short story about family resilience had been published in a national literary magazine and was being adapted into a short film by a local film school. But more than their individual achievements, what made Sophia proudest was their character. The boys had grown up understanding that success without integrity was meaningless, that kindness was more important than winning, and that family loyalty was the foundation of all other relationships. The debate tournament was held at the city's most prestigious private school, in an auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and academic officials. Sophia found her seat in the front row, where a small placard reserved her spot as parent of finalists Lucas and Matteo Alvarez. The topic was economic innovation and social responsibility, and both boys were competing on different teams in the championship round. Lucas argued with passionate conviction about the importance of ethical business practices, while Matteo presented a nuanced analysis of how successful companies could address social inequality. Watching them debate, articulate, confident, and deeply thoughtful about complex issues, Sophia felt overwhelmed by pride and gratitude. These young men were becoming exactly the kind of leaders the world needed. Intelligent without arrogance, successful without selfishness, strong without cruelty. When the results were announced, Lucas's team won first place, and Matteo's team took second. But what moved Sophia most was watching the brothers congratulate each other with genuine joy, each celebrating the other's success without reservation or jealousy. "Mom," Lucas said as they left the auditorium, his first-place trophy in hand, "did you see Matteo's closing argument? It was incredible. He's going to be an amazing writer someday." "And did you hear Lucas's point about corporate responsibility?" Matteo added, beaming with pride for his brother. "He's going to change how businesses think about their communities." That evening, after celebrating at the twins' favorite restaurant, Sophia tucked Lucas and Matteo into bed in their beautiful home in Crestview Heights. The house had evolved over the years from a symbol of financial security into a true family sanctuary, filled with photos of their adventures, awards from school achievements, and mementos from the life they'd built together. "Mom," Matteo said as she kissed his forehead, "can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you think we would be different people if our father had stayed? Like, would we care about different things or have different values?" It was a mature question that showed Matteo's developing understanding of how circumstances shape character. "That's a profound question," Sophia replied, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I think you might be very different. You might have grown up taking certain privileges for granted, or you might not have learned to value hard work and resilience the way you do now." Lucas appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening. "I think we're lucky he left," he said with the straightforward honesty that characterized him. "Not because we don't want a father, but because we got to see how strong and amazing our mom is. If he'd stayed, we might never have learned that families can be built on love and respect instead of just existing." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Lucas continued, climbing onto the bed beside his brother, "we learned that you don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. We learned that real love means supporting each other's dreams, not tearing each other down." Matteo nodded seriously. And we learned that success means being proud of who you are and what you've accomplished, not needing to make other people feel small. When did you two become so wise? Sophia asked, pulling both boys close. We had a good teacher, Matteo said simply. As Sophia turned out the lights and headed to her own room, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 12 years ago, she'd been broken, desperate, and convinced she was worthless. Tonight, she was the CEO of an international company, the mother of 2 remarkable children, and a respected leader in her community. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, Sophia allowed herself to think about Victor one more time. Somewhere out there, he was living with the consequences of his choices, alone, diminished, having lost everything he'd thought mattered. But Sophia felt no triumph over his downfall, no satisfaction in his suffering. She felt only gratitude for the journey that had led her family to this place of complete fulfillment and joy. Victor had tried to define her as nothing. His cruelty had forced her to discover that she was everything. Everything he'd been too blind to see, everything he'd been too foolish to value, and everything he'd been too weak to deserve. The woman Victor had discarded no longer existed. In her place stood Sofia Alvarez, successful entrepreneur, devoted mother, and living proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from building a life so meaningful and beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant. As Sophia prepared for bed, she smiled at the thought of tomorrow. Lucas had a student government meeting to plan a community service project. Matteo had creative writing club and a mentoring session with a local published author, and she had a consultation with an international client who wanted Elegancia Events to coordinate a charity gala that would raise money for educational scholarships for children of single mothers. Life was full, purposeful, and completely her own. She had built an empire not through cruelty or manipulation, but through determination, integrity, and love. Victor Lane had called her nothing and walked away from the most precious things life had to offer. In the end, his cruelty had become the catalyst for her greatest triumphs, while his own choices had reduced him to exactly what he'd once accused her of being. Justice, Sophia understood now, wasn't about revenge. Justice was about becoming so completely and authentically yourself that the people who tried to diminish you fade into irrelevance while you rise into everything you were always meant to be. The broken woman was gone forever. In her place stood Sofia Alvarez, and she was magnificent.